This video is brought to you by the supporters of my Patreon. For information on how you can support the show, the link to my Patreon is in the description below. Hello and welcome to Artblock, the show where we talk about art and how it's made. I'm your host Spirit, and today we'll be comparing digital and traditional art, as well as some of the pros and cons about the various mediums. So you've decided you want to become an artist, but you're not sure what to do in terms of your medium. Do you focus on digital art and learn the tech, or do you go the traditional route and learn the technique? Now, speaking from experience, I feel that everyone planning to pursue art should at least be practiced in both mediums. However, if you're just doing it as a hobby or would like to focus on one particular skill set, then this video just might be the advice you're looking for. I'll be covering traditional art in a more broader term in this episode, however I will be covering the individual mediums in another episode. So let's get started with traditional art. What defines traditional art? Traditional art in this case is any form of art that is made with physical supplies, whether it be paints on canvas, pencil on paper, or even three-dimensional artwork. The first and most obvious pro to traditional art is that it is physical. Whenever you're making a piece of traditional art, the artwork is sitting there right in front of you. This can be quite a satisfying feeling whenever you're working on a big painting and it's sitting right in front of you. This sense of tangibility is also great because if you're working on, say, an oil painting, you can see the individual strokes and textures that have made up the piece. This is actually another pro to traditional art, is that there's quite a bit of control when it comes to your details. Since the piece is consistently at one size, the level of detail you have working in the piece is a little more consistent compared to a digital piece, where you have the ability to zoom in and out to get up close and personal. I've also found that having the piece of art right in front of you tends to make it a lot easier to make accurate and detailed strokes. Like for example, when I work with acrylic paint, I'm not constantly having to go back and fix little problems because I have a lot more control over my hand compared to the canvas. Speaking of paint, this actually brings us to our first con, which is longer working time. Something that I've noticed when it comes to traditional pieces is that pieces will tend to take a lot longer to work on. This is partially due to the fact that mediums like paints, watercolors, and some pastels take a while to cure and dry. For example, if you've ever watched Bob Ross's show The Joy of Painting, he does something called wet on wet oil paints, which means that he adds more paint to already wet paint. When you work with oil paints, the curing time can be anywhere from 18 to 24 hours, and that's assuming you don't have to deal with any sort of humidity. That's a long time, and even if you do manage to keep people from touching it, just getting it safely off the easel can be a risk because if you bump the canvas on anything, the paint is going to come off onto whatever you bumped it into. That leads us to our next con, which traditional art can get pretty messy. There are certain mediums such as pencil that aren't quite as bad, but even pencils can get pretty messy if you're not careful. This is also just another mini-con, but traditional art can take up quite a bit of space. I have an entire shelf as well as a huge box of art supplies, and I don't even focus very much on traditional art. And that's just accounting for supplies. I've recently been trying to clear out some of my traditional art, and even then I still have two huge portfolios full of canvases and other projects. Since every piece is right there in reality, storage is very difficult to find, especially if you're working in a small studio apartment. However, one big advantage to traditional art is that it's comparably more valuable than digital art. It's a bit sad considering that digital art isn't as seen on the same level as traditional art by a lot of artists, but since traditional art requires at least a certain level of physical material to be used each time, the piece of art is going to have a fair level of value just because it's made with actual material. And that's not even accounting for the amount of time and love that goes into each piece. Lastly, one big pro is that traditional art is very much custom. Unless you're seeing a remake of a previously made piece, every traditionally made piece is one of a kind. Heck, even linoleum prints, which is when you carve a block of linoleum and stamp it onto paper, is still unique because there's tons of ways to combine colors with different styles of ink. While almost every piece of digital art is handmade, you can't just copy and paste traditional art, which makes it pretty cool. Moving on to digital art, probably the biggest pro is that it's comparably a lot cleaner than traditional art. When you're working with digital art, you don't have to worry about cleaning brushes or getting pastels on your favorite shirt. It's just you and the tablet. And since it's just you on the tablet, you don't need a lot of workspace either. As long as you have enough space to fit your computer and your tablet, then you'll be fine. I actually used to create art on one of those itty-bitty school desks back when I was using my original Intuos, just to give a bit of context to how small of a space you'll actually need. Since all of your pieces are digital files, you also won't have to worry too much about storing the artwork since it's all in your computer. Unfortunately, one of the overlying cons of digital art is that, especially if you're working with Photoshop or other creative cloud products, you'll usually have very large, very weighty files that might take a while to open up and requires a lot of storage space on your hard drive. This can be especially difficult if you're working on a computer that's old, has low amounts of RAM, or has a solid-state drive, aka low storage space. My computer is about 5 years old, and over the years I've had to purchase more RAM in order to keep up with the increasing size and count of my files. Unfortunately, Creative Cloud tends to be quite expensive, which leads us to our next con: inconsistent pricing. Now, whether this is a con is up to you, but due to the variety of pricing when it comes to tablets and programs, there's not really one set price for digital art. Depending on whether you're making it a hobby or planning to make it a career can somewhat determine what range you're going to have when it comes to your pricing. However, over the 5 years I've been doing digital art, I've probably spent more money on tablets than I have on my Creative Cloud license. To be honest, if you're doing digital art more as a hobbyist, you're using free programs, and you don't have to buy a tablet, then digital art can actually be less expensive than traditional art in the long run. This actually leads us to our next pro of digital art, which is, given what you're using, you have a lot more options when it comes to the style of your piece. With digital art, you can replicate a lot of different art styles, such as watercolor, acrylic paint, colored pencil. If you can name it, a computer can most likely do it. Normally with traditional art, you're required to go out and buy new tools and supplies every time you want to do something with a different medium, but given the slew of codeable brushes and programs, you don't always need to go out and spend money just to try out a new look. Unfortunately, one of the biggest downsides to digital art is that it's artificial. Unlike with traditional art, where you can physically touch your artwork, digital art all exists within the realm of the computer. This in part contributes to another con in which it's seen as less valuable. Since there are no art supplies involved other than the computer and the tablet, digital art is sadly seen as not as valuable in the fine art world. What gives digital art its value is primarily the time and effort put into it, and since digital art is also relatively fast, that unfortunately contributes to its lesser value. However, one of the biggest pros to learning digital art is that it's the future of the art industry. A lot of creatively oriented jobs nowadays that don't specifically tie into just illustration will usually require some form of digital background in order to maintain with the times. Whether it be simply the knowledge of how to modify photos into your art or making art fully from scratch in the computer, having even some knowledge in the digital realm is incredibly important to the art industry today. Now, we've discussed the pros and cons of both digital and traditional art, but I want to hear from you. Do you focus on digital or traditional art, and what are some of the pros and cons that you've discovered from working with the medium of your choice? Let me know in the comments below. And that's about it for today's episode. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to receive notifications of future episodes of Art Block. It supports me and is practically free. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter and DeviantArt, where I post artwork and updates about the show. Want to chat with me about art and other fun stuff? Well, I'm happy to announce that I now have a Discord server. Patrons get access to the Patreon rank as well as a private channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm Spirit, and I'll see you next time.